Chairman, you mentioned that this was the longest hearing you've had in your 4 years. I mean, just to summarize, how difficult was it to come to this decision?
No, at the end of the hearing, I don't think it was difficult at all in my mind. Other commissioners may have a different opinion, but there's a balance here between enforcing the regulations, and then as a commission, we need to always look forward and be the gold standard and adjust to things that come before us. And make no mistake about it, those decisions in my mind are heavily weighted on Dr. Eichner. He is the foremost expert in the world in anti-doping. There's nobody better or smarter. There's a lot of people that are out there that are good. And we rely on him heavily, and we have a relationship with him for a very, very long time. So, I think that the passport system for the UFC, in my opinion, is what saved Jon Jones today, because we would not have that knowledge of this idea of pulsing 4 years ago when I joined this commission. There was no concept of that type of testing program. So, and that was the whole idea for developing it and supporting it and allowing them to do it. And now we're seeing the benefits of actually getting to see that. So, I think that at the end of the day, I feel very confident that he does not have any performance-enhancing capabilities when he walks into the octagon on March the 2nd if the tests continue to stay consistent with what we've seen at the picogram level. That's first and foremost and my #1 concern. The second piece of this is a little bit of uncharted water where we're going to monitor an athlete and the oral turinabol all the way down to the long-term metabolite of M3, and we're going to see what this does in his system over the next 12 months. But I'm also confident that the frequency in which he will be tested for 12 months, we will have a better set of data that would now be from August of 2018 to December 31st of 19, and we can get an idea of how long this residual or pulsing will last. You know, at the end of 19, he may still have this pulsing and this idea of residual, and we may decide to continue it for another year. You know, in all seriousness, he's become, through his own voluntary approach, he's volunteered to be a test case for this. And as long as he has no performance-enhancing benefit, I feel very comfortable in allowing that test to happen. This is a drug we need to understand, and it's not allowed to be orally ingested anywhere in the world. So how other way would you understand it? That's a very long-winded answer to your question. There's a lot of stuff there, but that's how I kind of got to where I did today.
Were you guys satisfied about, you saw his answer regarding why Jones was not tested in that 10-month gap between October 2017 and August 2018?
I wouldn't say I was satisfied or dissatisfied. I'd say I understand it. I understand that answer. If a fighter's on suspension, he's cooperating, he's working. You know, it's not normal to be tested at the level Jon Jones has been tested regardless of the gap. You know, most of these fighters are 2 times a year, maybe 4. That's kind of the average. So, you know, it is what it is, and that's why I frankly discarded all of that in my thought process. You know, past that August of 2018 date, I can't look at that data because there's too big of a gap in there where, based on testimony, re-ingestion could have taken place, and we could be back at the M3 metabolite level. So we'll never know if he did or he didn't, and frankly, it doesn't really matter to me. What matters is on March the 2nd that he doesn't have any performance-enhancing effect from August of 18, and that's all I care about.
Seemed like jurisdictional issues were very important to you guys today. How much of an issue has that been in this process?
There's always been jurisdictional debates in the past between testing agencies and attorneys and commissions. I would caution them. They need to. Nevada's reg is very broad. You know, it's basically worldwide at any time, even if you're fighting here or not. But we don't abuse that reg. We don't go out and test fighters that we know are fighting in other jurisdictions just randomly. We're not here to be intrusive or be bullying from that perspective. We're here to just regulate our sport in our state. But we always have had, and I don't think this is a jurisdictional discussion that happened today. I think it's more of a disclosure discussion and how fast these tests are getting to us. You know, there's a process between testing results and then results reporting. Interpretation of those results is not something that any testing agency should hold on before submitting it to the agency where the fighter is either under suspension or scheduled to fight. Now, if the fighter is out in the ether and has no scheduled fight, he's not under suspension, then that should stay within the UFC. I mean, I wouldn't say, oh, fighter X tested positive, he's not under suspension, he has no fights anywhere else, I'm going to take this published positive and send it to every athletic commission in the world. That's not reasonable. but he was under California's jurisdiction, no questions asked. He was under suspension there, serving that time, and they should have been informed of that report immediately, and they were not. And that's a problem.
Is there greater concerns about the UFC and USADA's relationship and how they handle things?
At this time, no. There's been plenty of bumps in introducing this new testing program, and all I've ever done, and I think Executive Director Bennett's done, is encouraged to work through these problems. There are communication gaps, and there were communication gaps with USADA long before the UFC ever hired USADA to do its testing. Maybe known or unknown to the public or to the press, but these have been here since I got here. And we've got to get better at it. They have to get better at it. For our world, it's really simple. We just want the information as fast as we can get it. We don't always get that. So the issue they all have to recognize is that testing program is approved by this state. That testing program can also be unapproved by this state. And so we're going to continue to work through, out of respect for the agencies and their reputations, to continue to try to get better. But if it gets to a point where we're not happy, then we will have a hearing on if that should perpetuate, at least in Nevada. So those are things that I'm not there yet. I don't think we're there yet. I think we need to work through some issues. But this bumps are happening, and they happen. Once this is a bump, it's a big bump. But it's not like we go through these bumps every month. So.
For Executive Director Bennett, you had asked Jones about the substantial assistance clause that I guess shortened his suspension from what could have been 4 years to 18 months under USADA. As the state, who issues licenses, should Nevada or California not know what this situation was that allowed that pretty drastic shortening of a suspension?
Well, I think that's a slippery slope. Depending upon what the substantial assistance was by Mr. Jones. And under USADA's rules, he doesn't have to articulate what they were. If he wanted to, he could have. Would be nice to have known what he did in order to get a 3-month reduction, as well as maybe give him a little bit more credibility based on the fact that he does not know how oral turinabol was ingested. So, but I can understand why they didn't at the same time too, according to their regulations.
Anything else? Sorry to keep you guys here all
We
afternoon.
didn't really even talk about Connor at all either, or Connor and Khabib earlier. So you guys are comfortable with how that whole process played out as far as coming to an agreement and the suspensions that were issued?
I am, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you can look at what happened that night just about any which way you want to look at it, especially if you sit back for a couple of months and digest it and watch it over and over and over. And at the end of the day, I think that the Attorney General made a correct recommendation. It's fairly in the lane as far as past practice is concerned for the actions that took place. I think you could argue that maybe Khabib should have got a longer sentence, but he also received the largest fine that I'm aware of for misconduct outside of Mike Tyson. So that's a massive number. $500,000 is a massive number for misconduct. I think he understands how bad it was. Connor's a whole nother issue, but Connor's, and I don't mean another issue in a bad way. I mean, it's a different issue or a different set of circumstances. The man was on the ground, tapped out and done, and he responded. And all I can go off is that he tried to get out of the cage, but he didn't make it. And then after he got brought back into the cage, he got hit 4 to 6 times trying to defend himself from behind. Is it misconduct? Should he have just sat there? Yeah, but as you know, none of these guys are going to sit there. But I don't think he started it post-fight. He certainly may have instigated it post-fight, but I tried to make that clear for the record. We don't go after verbal, instigations. Verbal instigations are not where we go yet. I think you're going to start to see us have to adjust again. Just like oral turinabol, we're going to have to discuss mouthy fighters and the things that they say prior to fights and what the consequences are for that.
And I know you addressed that, and I think a lot of people would applaud the effort. The undertaking might be a massive thing. I mean, is that something that you think you can accomplish, and how strict can you be on regulations and something like that, policing speech?
I think we can be as strict as we want to be. What we don't want to do is come in out of nowhere and just do this. What we want to do is properly discuss it quickly, take feedback, follow the public process, make sure that it's well documented what our expectations are, issue a code of conduct policy that's maybe a little more elaborate, and furthermore, encourage our promoters to follow their own code of conduct policy. And those code of conduct policies already address these types of issues. So there's multiple ways to look at it going forward. And the promoters are going to have to step in equally with the fighters. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's not necessarily a knock on any of the promoters, but the promoters are going to have to start taking some ownership for this and putting fighters in a little bit more of a box on how far we can go with this, because we don't need this. It's the first time I've ever been called from the industry that said, don't ever bring that back here. And that usually doesn't happen on Las Vegas Boulevard. But you know, even there's a moral line here, and it's been crossed. There's no question about it. And there's something that we're going to have to address. And we're not afraid to.
Now, when you say bring it back here, are you referring to the language, or are you referring to the violence that happened in the cage and in the...
All the above. You know, the verbal lead up to, you know, the exodus from the cage, you know, all the things that happened on the concourse that night at T-Mobile. A lot of people ran out of there not happy, afraid, not, you know, scared, not coming back. And so it's got to be good for everybody. You know, I'm a big fan of all the arrows pointing in the same direction. And if it's just good for the UFC and it's not good for the T-Mobile and it's not good for Las Vegas, then it's not good for this town.
But the
It's got to be.
led up to the fight,
Absolutely.
which led to one of the biggest events.
And that's,
so people didn't have a problem with the verbal, you could argue, but maybe it was more of the safety measures.
well, those have also been addressed. All the safety measures have already been addressed, and you'll see a substantially different octagon at the next UFC fight in Las Vegas. That was addressed within a week after that fight. You're going to see Metro presence like you've never seen around that octagon. No different than it is in boxing. So security-wise has been addressed, but verbal antagonization to lead up to those events has got to get itself put back in check. You know, we can't cross lines into families and race, and it's just not what the sport's about. 85% of these fighters, 90% of these fighters are some of the most ethical, nice, humble people ever. And I'm not saying Conor's not. Love Conor McGregor, love him here. Got to know him. We had a lot of side conversations. But I think that he's amps these things up, and these other guys, it's just a show. I actually look at half of it, you know, most of the time and go, it's fake. It was like listening to Floyd when I first got here. I had so many private conversations with Floyd in the dressing room. He was the nicest guy in the world. He never got like that. But the minute you guys got in front of his face, the whole thing changed. It's like, whoa, who's this guy? That's not the guy we just been talking to. It's all promotion, and they're pushing it too far.
But devil's advocate would say the dollar speaks, and people have voted with their dollar by paying for it.
I think on that night, people voted with their dollar by paying for it. I think after they saw what can happen after it goes too far, I would say that there's a lot of dollars that are no longer in favor of it. I know that for a fact. So
Is
those
that
are
because of the language or the violence?
all the above. All the above. So we're going to have to figure out how to address it. I'm not telling you we have the answers, but we're going to have to figure out how to address it and keep it all at bay. So the first thing is the public safety, and that's been addressed. If we have a verbal altercation before another fight that leads up to something that gets out of line, I'm highly confident that those fighters will not be getting out of the octagon again anytime soon. And that altercation will stay in the octagon if it does happen. We've also put a lot of security measures in place to ensure that if something post-fight is to occur, that we are in there much faster than we have in the past. So you'll see all that on March the 2nd. But as far as the verbal piece, that's the piece that will be tougher to deal with.
It's down the road, but how much would you expect the First Amendment challenge to that, being a government agency?
I haven't thought that far.
It's unsportsmanlike conduct,
Yeah.
right off the bat.
Yeah, I guess you can say whatever you want at any time, but that doesn't mean that you should earn a privilege license.
Right.
And I think that's people have to understand that this license is a license of privilege, not a license of right. And so I'll leave that up to a bunch of attorneys to fight it out. But I think most people would subscribe to let's tone it down a little bit. And those who don't, we'll deal with that if they don't.
Now, last year you said that Conor and Khabib were going to be required, per se, to be here.
Yeah, per the regulation, if they reach a settlement agreement, that those are always waived. So, and that's why they weren't here. If we had not reached a settlement agreement, then they would have had to been here to testify. But because the agreements were reached, appearance was waived, which is consistent with past practice. Again, I'm a consistent guy, and I like consistency. I like procedure. I like process. I don't like arbitrary and capricious moves, and I don't like treating anybody outside the norm of how we have treated fighters in the past. So they should have been waived like anybody else because of I did not, at the time I made that statement, I was not confident a settlement agreement would be reached with these guys. It didn't seem like that was of appetite for any of them. So obviously their opinions changed. So.
There were a few other people that were involved in that brawl that were initially on agendas earlier. I think it was last year. Dylan Dennis, I believe you guys said perhaps next month he'll have his hearing or proposed adjudication agreement. And then there were two others, Rizvan Magomedov and Ezadullah Imiragayev. I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly, but what is the status of those two?
We're continuing to move forward. Their actions were totally unacceptable. I'm working with the Deputy Attorney General, and they will be resolved in the immediate future. Right now, today's hearing was to, take care of come into the settlement agreement with 4 individual fighters, and now that we got that settled, we'll move forward to the next 3.
Just one last one for me, just to go back to the notification. You guys sort of said about you weren't happy with the way that USADA reported to you guys. Do you guys ever hold fault with the UFC that they may be found out? Are they obligated to let you guys know immediately that something's coming down the pipe? Are you guys upset with maybe they're...
I don't think we're upset with anybody. Bob and I don't get upset. Do you get upset, Bob?
I'm the easiest going guy there is.
Bob doesn't get upset. I don't get upset. We have not had any issues with notification that I'm aware of at the UFC level. I understand the dilemma here, and I also understand that when he did come into our jurisdiction, as far as we've always used the announced date of the fight, at that point we were pretty quickly notified. Of my correct?
Yes, we were.
Yeah, we were pretty quickly notified. Prior to them bringing Jon Jones to Las Vegas, they would have no reason to notify us. So, but they did have an obligation, all of the above, to notify California, and that's Mr. Foster's fight to go fight. But if I was him, I would be irate, because he went through a lot. Watch his testimony on December the 11th and watch the things that he said about Mr. Jones and what he believed and what he thought and where he wanted to go. I would venture to say that would have been a dramatically different hearing if he would have had those 4 test results.
And you're absolutely correct, Chairman, because that's exactly what he told me last night.
We know that for a fact. So that's Andy's discussion to have with all of you. But that's where it should have happened. The UFC has always had a high degree of transparency with us. That we have a lot of dialogue with them on a continual basis about different issues.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, man.